All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. I have learned that several of you have midterms this week. So in an effort to not overload you, I am also doing another short lesson this week, just a little devotional thing. So you guys can get back to it. Next week, we're going to get down into some serious stuff with, does God care about social justice? And start taking a look at some important groups that are calling for justice today, like BLM, and see how that aligns with a Christian biblical conception. So, we'll be taking a look at some of that. Now, here's what's going to happen, just so you know, for the rest of the month. I have to go back to Oklahoma the last 2 weeks of October to help my parents move into a new house. So we will not be moving this class to Tuesday. We will not be moving this class to Tuesday until the first Tuesday of October. First Tuesday, of November, which will be the week after I get back. So throughout October, we'll meet at 7 o'clock on Wednesday. And I'll cover next week. James or Todd will cover one of the 2 weeks that I'll be gone, and I'll resume back in November. So anyway, just so you are aware of that as we go forward. But tonight, let's talk about tests. Like you want to hear anything else about tests now. How many of you, you guys have all had midterms, and some of you still have midterms going on. Amelia was mentioning that some of her teachers gave her, she has a fall break, and some of her teachers gave her a test, a midterm, when they come back. So, thank you for playing. Enjoy your fall break. No, thank you. Your fall break now consists of studying for a midterm. So, yeehaw. So, what I want you to think about is how much time that you spent preparing for that midterm. How much effort went into that study, preparation for those tests. Just kind of an average. I want you guys to kind of give me some numbers. How much time did it take per test to get prepared to pass, fail, do mediocre, whatever you did? How much time did it take for you to get ready for a midterm? That's an actual question. Nobody wants to offer us input on how long.
Check the chat.
Check the chat. Well, I'm used to hearing voices. So Josh says that it depends on the test, but typically 4 to 3 days or 3 to 4 days, But yeah, so that's a lot of time. Sometimes it takes less. Sometimes it's a couple days. Sometimes it just depends on the midterm and, whether it's comprehensive or just covering the chapter for that week. Some teachers give you a break and it's not comprehensive to that point. But, the more difficult the test, the more time. What was the most difficult class or midterm? What was the most difficult class that you had a midterm in? And what made it hard? You didn't have chemistry this semester. Annalise. Chemistry was difficult, though, for you. Anatomy. Josh says anatomy. Who else? What? You're having some internet problems at the student center, eh?
We got it. Good now.
What made the hardest midterm hard? What was it that made it difficult for you?
I had to being a camera. Oh, speaker.
Okay. Well, I don't want to lessen the importance of the midterms or the finals that are going to be coming up and all that stuff. But I want you to think about this. These are not the most important tests that you're going to face in life. In fact, when you get out of college, other than your initial job, your GPA won't matter. That's just the way it is. Your skills in a workplace will come into play, but your GPA isn't going to mean a thing. When I was in college the second time, I won the Academic Achievement Award, right? It doesn't mean a thing 10 years later. It means nothing. But, I mean, for a period of time, there was something there. It was helpful to put on a resume, but quite frankly, preaching and trying to find preaching, a work is an entirely different beast altogether. So, can you name some important tests that you're going to face during the course of your life that make your midterms pale by comparison?
You'd say like a test of the world continuing to change.
Say what?
Like a test of faith in the world beginning to change more.
Okay. Well, how about just in your personal life? CPA exam certification. Okay, yeah, career things associated with your career. If you're going into law, passing the bar, but and other things of that nature. But on a more personal nature, what kind of tests will you face that make your midterms look like, a joke by comparison? How about you have a house payment and you lose your job? Do you think that would be a test? How about you're having marital problems? Many people have them. Life is difficult, and oftentimes it compounds, and you and your spouse go at each other. How about chronic illness, terminal disease? Last year, we had a guy that I was friends with that was just a few years younger than me die from cancer. You think that was a test for his wife and his children? Death of a family member, maybe even your spouse. Those are all tests. How do you prepare for those tests? Did you see how much effort went into your preparation for these tests that ultimately mean nothing in the long run? Now, these are necessary things that you have to do while you're in school so you can obtain your degree, your certification, whatever it might be. But in the grand scheme of things, what you got in chemistry doesn't mean a thing when your spouse dies. How do you prepare for that? I think it's important to think about these things, you're young adults moving into a new phase of life. It's time. You need to don't be somebody that doesn't consider the important things in life, and then get caught completely off guard later on. Do you have any idea? How would you prepare for that? I want to hear what you think. And I don't blame you. That's kind of a tough question, isn't it? Well, how is it that we prepare for regular tests? You become familiar with pertinent material, right? Putting on the whole armor of God isn't merely that you might stand against Satan, although that does have that effect. but putting on the whole armor of God is that you might stand in trials as well. And you don't begin putting on your armor when your hand is in the midst of the lion's mouth. You start putting it on ahead of time. You don't see many warriors going into battle strapping on your flak jacket, with their guns not loaded, to speak in modern terms. We have to be prepared. And that preparation begins with God's word. That preparation begins with prayer, begins with developing that relationship and strengthening those the tie and knowledge of Jesus. James puts it like this there's a benefit that comes from doing these things, though. Facing these tests and these trials, James says that these trials produce steadfastness when we face them properly, that you may be complete, perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Now, he's not saying that you might be sinless. He's saying when you see the word perfect, it's speaking of maturity in this sense. So he's talking about these trials create Christian maturity, that we might come to rely on the Lord more and more as we go through these difficult times in life. Peter put it this way in 1 Peter 1, verse 7, talking about being grieved by various trials. Now, that could involve persecution and other things. And he says that you've been grieved so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus. In other words, that you won't be ashamed of the way that you've run the Christian race when Jesus returns. It builds maturity. It builds faith and the ability to trust in the Lord and his strength in difficult times. And in these tests of Christian character, in the situations that we talked about and in so many other times in life, we learn something about ourselves. And when we pass these tests, it allows us to rely on Jesus' strength more fully going forward. But also when we stumble during these tests, it points out the places in our lives and in our walk of faith that require additional attention and work. How many of you had people drop out of your classes when they realized they weren't prepared for the midterms? A lot of people. I think Carol had somebody drop their class because he was not prepared for midterms. And he's like, okay, I'll just take a withdrawal on this. Well, the truth is that when we face trials in life, some people drop the class. Figuratively speaking, in a spiritual sense, they drop the class. Jesus, in the parable of the soils, spoke of a soil that, the seed that fell on the rock, and when it grew up, it withered away since it lacked moisture. And then he describes this as the ones who hear and receive the word with joy, but having no root, they believe for a while and fall away in a time of testing. People do drop the class when it comes to your spiritual life. Don't be that person. Don't be the person that puts so much time into your actual midterms that you forget to build and prepare for the real tests in life that matter. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us, because they come when we least expect it. Proverbs records a couple of tests, these spiritual tests, in similar terms, and they speak to they're almost exactly the same in phrasing, but they speak to two different types of testing. One is external and one is internal, and by passing these things, we demonstrate wisdom. We are passing the test of character for God's people. And it's put forward in the picture of gold being refined. And if you know anything about that, when you refine ore, you heat it up and the impurities come to the surface, and it leaves you with when then you remove those impurities, and it leaves you with a solid brick of pure gold or pure silver or whatever it might be. And the smelting process makes it very obvious where the impurities are at, that they might be separated from the real stuff and removed. And this is how the Bible most often speaks about the spiritual tests in life that reveal the genuine character of our faith before the Lord, the good stuff and the impurities as well. But unlike the lifeless metal that you see here on the screen that requires the smelter to remove it, we are required to participate in the removal of these impurities in our life when in the time of testing we see these things appear. And it's something that we need to be engaged in. So the first test that we see in Proverbs, there's two of them, and they're very, very similar. And the Proverbs writer says, the crucible is for silver. Now, the crucible and the furnace are synonyms, okay? They're talking about the smelting process. The crucible is for silver, the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests the hearts. Now, this is something that's similarly stated in Proverbs 21:2, where it says, every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. The Lord knows our hearts. The Lord tests our hearts and permits the testing of our hearts. It is the Lord who conducts these tests of faith. And this process usually involves some type of adversity. And we see it throughout the Bible, don't we? Can you name a biblical figure or two that experienced this kind of testing? Either permitted by the Lord or at the actual engagement of the Lord. Job, Anna said. Yeah, Job. Job is one. Job's an easy one that comes to mind. And he didn't even understand why it was happening. He was expected to trust in the Lord and his character during these very difficult times. Now, who else can you think of? Did Peter go through a time of testing? Satan is seeking to sift you, Peter. Whenever he denied Jesus, do you think that was a time of testing for him? He failed it, didn't he? But he learned from that, seeing the impurities in his walk in faith, and was strengthened going forward. And you don't see that. You don't see the Peter that we see in the Gospels in the book of Acts going forward as a result of the testing that he faced and the strengthening that he encountered as a result of that testing. But just because, but there are some people who look like Christians on the outside, but just because something looks like it doesn't mean that their inward motives and reasonings are right. How many of you have ever heard of a guy by the name of Martin Frobisher? He wasn't some guy who was LARPing in the park. This was he was a privateer. Now, can anybody tell me what a privateer is? A privateer in 1577 who went to Canada. Privateer. A privateer is basically a legal pirate. He's a legal pirate. He's been given some sort of documentation saying that he can raid certain types of ships and with nationalities and things of that nature. This is what Martin Frobisher was. And he went to what would be Canada, and he loaded up 1,400 tons of gold, like you see there. and brought it back to the queen. Had it shipped to London with his ships, lost some ships, but brought the bulk of it back. When he got there and it was smelted, they found out it wasn't gold at all. It was fool's gold. It was pyrite, iron pyrite, which the color looks kind of like gold, and it fools a lot of people. But when they smelted it, they found out it was basically worthless. Now, there was gold in it, but it was like 13 parts per every billion parts. So it was ultimately inconsequential and worthless. But it sure looked impressive, and they ground it up and used it for gravel for roads. So it was kind of a mess. Yes, that's right. Annalise, I'll give you a shout out. By the way, can anybody name what that's from other than my children?
One Piece.
That's right, One Piece. Anybody watch One Piece?
Kinda.
No. Okay, you are all miscreants. You need to know that. Oh man, I love One Piece. I'm actually reading the whole. I'm on about 240 right now out of 900 chapters. So I got a long way to go. I'm trying to catch up with the chat here. What is this? He got a fire outfit. Okay, I'm not even going to try to. People are going to look at this video and they're going to, what in the world? Like in every other video that I make. Okay, so please let it never be said that your walk of faith, when tested, is as authentic as fool's gold. Please, that's right, man. Optimus Prime is my dude. Just saying. Get that Bumblebee junk out of here with these little kids like in Bumblebee. Prime is it. And I'm talking not Michael Bay Prime. I'm talking old school Prime because I'm old school. There you go. Or just old, however you want to say it. Here's the second test. The second proverbial test deals with external things. Notice the difference between the two. Here's the first test. The crucible is for silver and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests the hearts. This is the second one. The crucible is for silver, the furnace is for gold, and a man is tested by his praise. You see, whereas the first proverbial test is rooted in external circumstances and how we react to it, this test seems to revolve and expose the internal quality of the heart as we perceive it. Literally, you can literally render this, and I went and sort of rendered this, translated this myself. And so a person is tested by the mouth of his praising, is what it literally says in the Hebrew. And this verse is kind of, when you hear that, it's kind of vague. And you're going to see a lot of different translations. And I guarantee you, if you have 3 or 4 different translations there at the Student Center or wherever you're studying, you're going to see it rendered differently. And that's because there's some vagaries involved here. Now, this could speak to this could be understood in several different ways. And each reveals something about the heart. When we look at that, it could speak about, the things that the person considers praiseworthy reveal something of his or her internal character. They are tested in that sense and reveal the quality of their heart by the things that they find praiseworthy. I went in and studied with somebody at their house in Kingston, Tennessee one time when I was a chaplain. Actually, this was a chaplain response with the police department. I was on a reserve police department. I was on a reserve police officer, chaplain, things of that nature. So I went in, and the guy's house was covered wall to wall in just X-rated pornography everywhere on the walls, posters, videos, magazines. It's just laying everywhere. And he wanted to study the Bible in that environment. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, dude, I'm never going to be able to unsee this. And I'm like, we can't have a spiritual conversation in that. And it tells me something about that individual to walk in and see these are the things that he considered praiseworthy. And it spoke volumes about the heart. So think about the things that you consider praiseworthy that you devote time to. And then ask yourself, what does this say about the quality of my heart, or does it reveal some impurities that need to be worked out in my life? That's certainly a part of what this could be speaking to. It could also speak to the way that one is perceived in the community of faith. Now, remember, this is written to people in in Israel, and how that community of faith and what they say about you reveal about your character. Oh, we only see that person. That person claims to love the Lord, but we only see them on Easter and Christmas. There's a lot of people like that. Don't worry, they love Jesus, right? Wrong. Sorry. Maybe that sounds rough, but that develops a reputation in the brotherhood of one who doesn't or is not devoted to. And I'm not talking about somebody with physical infirmities that can't make it, or have lost capability and can't make it, things of that nature. I'm talking about those who can, could, should, but just don't. And there's a lot of other things that go into this. That person's always causing problems in the brotherhood. This person's always seeking to cause divisions and strife and things of that nature. I've got a book called Well-Intentioned Dragons, Dealing with Difficult Christians. And let me tell you, there are a bunch of difficult Christians at times. So that's a really interesting name for that book. And, we just need to make sure that we always consider other people more significant than ourselves. So much of the problems that we face in the church can be handled if we just loved as we have been loved and count others more significant than ourselves. If we just followed Jesus. So it could be the community speaking about that character. And let me submit, it might also be this. It could speak to the way that someone handles praise that reveals something about their character. When you start to believe your press clippings, when you start to think that because of X, you are somehow superior to others, that comes across. And it's not a flattering picture. It is the dross, the impurities that float up in a life that somebody thinks is golden. And it just cakes over the top of it and ruins the image. Do they handle? Because think about the literal translation of this again. And so a person is tested by the mouth of his praising, or by the face of his praising, by the praise that comes towards us and how we handle that. Do we accept it with humility in a balanced manner, or do we let it go to our heads? I want you to consider what else, where in Proverbs, what it says here about Proverbs 6. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. And you know what the very first thing is? Haughty eyes. And that's not like haughty, like stunningly beautiful or whatever you might want to say. This is arrogant eyes. Person who is arrogant. The Lord, and this is above a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, that makes haste to run to evil, a false witness, and one who sows discord. But what's the very first thing the Lord hates? He hates arrogance in the hearts of those of his people. And I guarantee you that you have encountered people on campus. Maybe it's a professor. Maybe it's another student. Maybe you've encountered another Christian who has started to believe their own hype. Can you think of some? I don't want to name, but can you think of someone like that? How did that impact your perception of them over time? It ruined it, didn't it? How we handle these things impact our spiritual walk in life. And these are everyday things, but also the difficult tests in life that we'll face. You know, basically, these are more important, ultimately, than any midterm you're going to take. Yeah, it won't impact how much money you make. I got news for you. How much money you make in life is not the preeminent concern of life. How much prestige you can manage to amass during life is not the ultimate, goal. You want to know what the meaning of life is? Glorify God in Christ. That's it. And people pay tons of money for books and try to find out what truth is. I just gave you the truth for free. And you know what? The Lord gave it to us through his word. So these are the tests that we face in life, and they have a greater impact and a greater importance because they directly impact our walk with Jesus, and they can reflect the sometime embarrassing truth that of our current walk with Jesus, that maybe it's not what it should be. And this has an eternal importance, unlike any midterm or final that you'll ever take, unlike any bar test or any certification test you might take. John put it this way in 1 John 2:28 and 29, and I'll leave you with this. I want you to just think about this. In light of the amount of time you've put in preparing for midterms and finals, and that's what your role is right now. But don't forget you're Christians, and be prepared for the real tests in life, the tests that truly matter. And you can't cram for those things like you can a midterm. And now, little children, abide in him, so that when he appears, we may have confidence and not shrink from him in shame at his coming. When we pass the test of faith. Something to think about. Any thoughts or questions tonight? Did anybody find the Ant-Man? The Ant-Man is actually quite cleverly placed tonight. Let me get it, and I'll show you real quick. The Ant-Man is on the floor. Nobody ever saw it. I promise you. No, here we go. Look at this. He was in the Sharknado.
Wait, the Sharknado. Have you seen that movie? Yeah. It's so terrible.
So he was in the Sharknado pop. I love this stuff. Have you ever seen one of those?
Oh, I want
I
one.
could barely see the Sharknado thing, so much less the Ant-Man.
Okay. You want to know something really strange? You know Vicky Kirby? Vicky Kirby loves the Sharknado movies. She has seen every one of them. Watches them. Not even a joke. She truly does.
What?
Vicky Kirby. Next time you see her, ask her if she likes Sharknado. We had a surprising conversation for about 20 minutes about Sharknado. All right, y'all have a good evening. Appreciate you.